I was young and I went with some friends to a local wooded hangout to party. The night should have been fun, but shortly after leaving for the party, I was struck with a strange feeling of foreboding, one that I cannot explain, and have never had since. It was a strange feeling of distraction, a sense that I was waiting for something to happen. This strange feeling kept me from having a good time that night. I tried to enjoy myself, but this weird feeling kept hounding me. So I drank quite a bit and fell asleep in someone's car early in the night. I knew the person the car belonged to, a friend of mine, but I had not arrived in this car. I woke up briefly in the morning still lying in the back seat of the car. It was moving, so I opened my eyes. It was daylight, my girlfriend at the time was now in the back seat with me, and I was still lying down. The person that the car belonged to knew where I lived and I assumed he would take me home. So I allowed myself to fall back asleep. The next thing I remember is hearing the screeching of tires. When I heard the sound I was suddenly wide awake, but outside of myself. I had a complete sense of inner peace, time had slowed down to almost a crawl. The driver had lost control of the car and was skidding across the highway at about 100 km an hour. He went from one shoulder of the road, tried to regain control, and shot across the highway the other way. The car went sideways and rolled 3 times before landing in a ditch. In real time, it probably took no more than 10 to 15 seconds for the accident from start to finish. But my perspective was far different. From my perspective it lasted a lot longer, at least 5 or 10 minutes. Although there is no way to gauge it because I was out of time, so to speak, and time had slowed down to a crawl for me. Just to give you an example of how strange time became during the accident. During the first roll of the car the windows blew out. And the safety glass in car windows shatter into little cubes that fly everywhere. During my experience, time went so slow that I could follow the individual cubes of glass as they traveled through the air. The car was spinning wildly at 100 km an hour or more, but it was like a scene in the movie, The Matrix. Gave me chills when I first saw this movie because the scenes where time slows down reminded me of the experience I had during the accident. During the accident I felt like I could have stopped time at will and plucked one of those glass cubes out of the air and put it in my pocket. It was extremely bizarre. I was not wearing a seatbelt and I too was flying through the car smashing off things, and this was in super slow motion. The time distortion was only one strange thing that happened, the others were equally as strange. I left myself, and by this I mean my consciousness left my body. My vision remained from the perspective of through my eyes. And I didn't have the experience of actually viewing myself from outside of myself. Nevertheless I was outside of myself, and I knew it. I can't explain this part well, I was not in my body anymore. I felt I was just behind my right ear, and I felt small, like about the size of a speck of dust. And I was talking to myself, but the inner voice was very different than I usually am, outside of myself instead of within myself. It was me, but a different me, a more peaceful and more knowledgeable me. Like I said, it is very hard to explain. But I was telling myself that everything would be alright, I was consoling myself. I very clearly told myself that it was just time for this. And I had a moment of realization that I had known that this moment was coming forever, from the time I was born. It was like some part of me knew every single thing that would ever happen to me. And I had just forgot it all, but still I knew it at the same time. I felt an incredible peace like it was nothing while I was careening around the inside of this car. My body was being smashed to bits on every little surface. I hit the roof, then the door handle, then smash, the dome light, then the roof again. Then someone's head was smashing and little cubes of glass were embedding themselves into my flesh at all points, etc. Yet during the whole thing I felt the most peaceful and aware and composed that I have ever felt. Strange. I felt no pain whatsoever, because I was disconnected from my body. Even though I could still see through my eyes, I was not in my body. And I was still me, but I was me with a much higher knowledge and a sense of inner peace and acceptance. I knew that the accident was supposed to happen and I surrendered to that. And I knew that I would be fine, although I didn't really care either way at the time. You could have told me that I would be killed in the most gruesome of ways. And honestly, I was very close to just that, and I would not have cared. I would have just accepted anything that happened to me as just what was supposed to be. I also knew that the feeling I had had the night before was because I knew that I was going to have this accident the next day. In a way, I had a precognition, but I didn't know what it was. I have never had the feeling since and I can't really explain what it felt like. But I know it was that, and it has made me question everything since. I'm not a person that ever believed in fate. And to be honest, I'm still struggling with the concept, but my experience makes me question the idea of fate a lot. During the experience I definitely felt like the accident was a predetermined event in my life. Something that I was meant to go through, something already written, that I could do nothing about nor avoid. Something that just was meant to be, and I accepted it completely while it was happening. When the car stopped rolling, it landed in a ditch on its roof, time came back to normal, I re-entered my body. And the pain came. I ended up breaking my spine in 4 places, internal bleeding, bit my tongue almost clean through and various other injuries. The other people in the car with me were as bad. My girlfriend at the time was very nearly killed. And spent 2 weeks in the intensive care unit in an induced coma. She lived, but it was touch and go. As far as I know, I was the only one who had a strange experience. It has since made me question my beliefs about life after death and fate. I think if it wasn't for this experience I would probably be an atheist. But after I can't help but believe that there must be more going on here, but I have no idea what it might be. This really isn't an NDE, because I was in a life-threatening scenario. But never really close to death, but I thought I would share it anyway. Because it was definitely out of the ordinary, and mystical. Through this site, I have encountered the term, fear-death experience. And I think my experience would qualify as one of these. Even though I was anything but fearful, I should have been. I have actually never experienced anything as pleasant as the time I nearly died.